The war had been long, bitter, and merciless. Humanity and the Korathal barbarians had clashed for more than a century, their battles spanning dozens of star systems. Each side bled, neither willing to yield. Humans fought with fleets of steel and fire, driven by ingenuity and survival. The Korathal fought with raw fury, their massive warriors preferring to die in glorious combat rather than surrender. Peace had always seemed like a myth, but exhaustion, even for the proudest warriors, eventually forces change. The Korathal warlord proposed what he called the Treaty of Blood and Bond. It was more than politics. It was tradition. Instead of words written on paper, peace would be sealed with warriors joined in marriage, uniting bloodlines, forging loyalty through personal ties. Humanity, desperate to stop the slaughter, agreed. That was how Captain Marcus Vale found himself walking into a chamber aboard the Korathal flagship, a chamber that felt more like a throne room carved from iron and fire. Massive banners of conquest hung from the ceiling, each one a record of battles the Korathal had won. Torches burned with green flame. Dozens of alien warriors stood along the walls, their golden eyes watching him like hunters sizing up prey. Marcus was not an ordinary officer. He had fought in campaigns across 3 sectors, scarred by battles where most men had died. Humanity respected him for his stubborn defiance, and perhaps that was why he had been chosen. If peace was to be sealed by a warrior, he was one of the few who had earned enough respect in both fleets to play the role. The warlord's daughter was brought forward. Her name was Soraka. She entered like a storm, towering over every man in the chamber, her steps heavy and deliberate. She was 7 feet of honed muscle and presence, scarred but unbroken, her bronze skin traced with glowing lines of biometal implants that pulsed faintly with each heartbeat. Her eyes, liquid fire, swept across the hall before fixing on Marcus. To Marcus, she looked less like a bride and more like a weapon forged by war. Every motion was sharp, every glance a challenge. The warlord spoke of unity, of ending a century of bloodshed. But Soraka cut him off, her voice filling the chamber with contempt. "I will not bind myself to a weakling," she declared, her words ringing like a blade striking steel. Not to him. Not to any man unworthy of me. A hush fell. No Korathal would dare interrupt her. The meaning of her words was simple. She would not accept Marcus as her husband. Not without trial. She stepped toward him, each stride deliberate. Her height cast him in shadow. "Among my people," she said, "a wife bows only to the one who proves stronger. A husband must conquer or be slain. I will not call you mine unless you defeat me in battle. Fail, and your blood seals this treaty instead." Marcus did not flinch. He had faced orbital bombardments, fought in collapsing stations, commanded men who had no hope of survival, yet followed him into fire. This woman, this force of nature, did not frighten him. If anything, he understood her. Respect among the Korathal was not given. It was taken. He looked her in the eye, and instead of protesting, he simply nodded. His voice was low but firm. "Then let's finish it now." The hall erupted in roars, warriors slamming fists against armor, chanting Soraka's name. To them, this was better than any treaty. This was spectacle, honor, and tradition all in one. The warlord leaned back, a flicker of interest crossing his battle-hardened face. Perhaps this human was more than the fragile species his people mocked. Marcus stepped forward into the circle, the torchlight dancing across the scars on his jaw and the black trim of his naval armor. A sword was handed to him, light, balanced, humming with a crackle of energy. Soraka unsheathed her own, a blade longer than his arm, its edge glowing faintly with plasma heat. 2 warriors, one from Earth, one from the Korathal, stood facing each other. Around them, an entire fleet held its breath. For Marcus, this wasn't just about survival. If he lost, peace would die with him, and the galaxy would burn again. If he won, against all odds, he might not only earn Soraka's respect, but also prove to both species that humanity was not fragile prey, but something far more dangerous. As the war drums thundered, Soraka raised her weapon, her molten eyes narrowing. "Show me," she growled. "Show me you are worthy of me. Or die as just another human." And with that, The battle that would decide the fate of two civilizations began. The circle of combat was drawn on the flagship's war hall floor, etched with scars from 1,000 duels past. The air was hot with anticipation, the pounding of war drums echoing like thunder. Korathal warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, their roars and chants vibrating through the walls. This was more than entertainment. This was trial, honor, tradition made flesh. Marcus Vale stood alone in the center, sword in hand. The weapon hummed faintly, a shock field running along its blade, designed to pierce armor with bursts of energy. He tested the weight, feeling how alien it was in his grip. He wasn't a duelist by training. He was a commander, a soldier who fought with strategy, firepower, and grit. But now, stripped of fleets and guns, all that mattered was what he could do with steel in his hands. Across from him, Soraka raised her weapon with a roar. Her blade was monstrous, nearly as long as Marcus was tall, glowing with a faint plasma sheen. It wasn't meant for dueling finesse, it was meant for destruction. She twirled it once, the air shrieking with heat as the energy along its edge cut faint sparks from the floor. Her eyes blazed like molten stars as she locked onto him. No signal was given. There didn't need to be one. The instant her muscles coiled, she was already upon him. The first strike came down like a hammer of the gods. Marcus barely moved aside in time, the blade smashing into the metal floor where he had stood. Sparks showered the arena. He countered with a quick thrust, but Soraka's reflexes were frightening. She twisted, parried with brutal strength, and sent him stumbling back. The crowd roared approval. Marcus steadied himself, mind racing. Strength against strength was suicide. Her reach, her power, her speed, she had him beat in every physical measure. But wars weren't won by brute force alone. She lunged again, her blade sweeping in a wide arc. Marcus ducked low, rolling under the strike, feeling the heat of plasma singe his hair. He slashed upward as he rose, his shock sword sparking against her thigh armor. The blade cut shallow, not deep enough to matter, but it drew first blood. Soraka grinned, fierce and savage. "Better than I thought," she growled and pressed harder. Their duel became a storm. She was relentless, driving him back with strike after strike, each one strong enough to shatter bones if it landed. Marcus shifted, dodged, deflected, conserving his energy, never standing where she expected. He moved like water against stone, refusing to give her the crushing blow she sought. But the storm was wearing him down. Every swing rattled his arms. Every near miss left him closer to death. He blocked one strike at the last instant, and the sheer force cracked his blade, splintering the edge. The crowd howled. Soraka raised her weapon high, ready to finish him with one decisive blow. Marcus saw the end rushing toward him, saw her shadow tower over him, the plasma edge blazing brighter. But instead of retreating, he stepped forward. At the last heartbeat, he dropped his ruined sword, grabbed the broken fragment with his offhand, and lunged inside her guard. Her blade came down, slicing a shallow wound across his armor, but he was already past it. The fragment pressed against her throat, sparking inches from the skin. Silence crashed over the hall. Soraka's glowing eyes widened. She could have crushed him with her raw power, yes, but he had beaten her with cunning, with precision, with the will to gamble everything on one final strike. No one had ever done this to her before. For a long breath, neither moved. Then Soraka let out a laugh, a wild, ringing sound that echoed like thunder. She threw back her head and roared, a warrior's laugh of acknowledgement. She dropped her weapon, letting it slam against the floor. "Enough!" she declared, voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "He has defeated me." The warriors watching erupted into shouts, some in disbelief, others in admiration. The warlord leaned forward, eyes narrowing, but even he allowed the faintest trace of a smile. The human had done the impossible. Soraka looked back at Marcus, her grin fierce, but her voice edged with something new, respect. "Then you are my husband. You have earned the right to claim me. But hear this." She leaned closer, her molten gaze burning into his. "You have my respect, not my heart." "Not yet. You have shown me you are not weak. Now you must show me you are worthy to stand beside me in war." Marcus, still breathing hard, his arm trembling from strain, simply nodded. He wasn't interested in claiming ownership. He was interested in peace. But he knew in that moment that this woman, this warrior, would never bow out of duty alone. She would only follow a man who proved himself, again and again. The hall exploded in chants, warriors pounding fists against their armor, honoring the duel. Marcus stood in the center of it all, weapon fragments still sparking in his hand, realizing that he had just taken the first step into something far larger than himself. The war wasn't over. The peace wasn't secure. But tonight, he had done what no human had ever done. He had defeated a Korathal war princess in single combat, and that changed everything. The duel ended, the treaty sealed, and for the first time in living memory, the stars grew quiet. Human fleets withdrew from contested sectors. Korathal raiders ceased their endless strikes. Merchants returned to forgotten trade routes, and border colonies dared to hope. For Marcus, peace felt strange. He had spent half his life in war, commanding men and ships in battles that burned entire worlds. Now he walked the decks of the Resolute without alarms screaming, without casualty lists waiting on his desk. Soraka was at his side more often than not, though never gently. She sparred with soldiers until they collapsed, drilled officers until they cursed her name, and treated every waking moment as preparation for the next battle. Yet beneath her fierce exterior, Marcus caught glimpses of something else. She inspected human warships with curiosity, marveling at their efficiency. She asked endless questions about human tactics, about why they fought as they did. She mocked weaknesses when she found them, but she listened. Marcus knew she was testing humanity as much as she was testing him, but peace is fragile. It shattered in a single transmission. The call came from the colony of New Perseus, a mining world on the rim. The hollow screen lit with static, voices broken by interference. "This is Perseus Control, unknown fleet, emerging from slipspace. Ships are living, gods help us." The feed dissolved into screams before cutting to black. At first, Marcus assumed it was a pirate raid. But scouts soon confirmed the truth. The attackers were not pirates, not Korathal, not any species recorded in human archives. They were something new, something worse. The first visuals stunned everyone. Vast black shapes, twisted like knots of bone and metal, drifting through space like predators. Their hulls seemed alive, pulsing faintly, as though the ships themselves were breathing. Weapons fired beams of distorted light that ripped through cruisers in a single shot. The reports spread like wildfire. 3 colonies gone in a week, entire fleets swallowed. Survivors spoke of creatures boarding ships, shadows with claws that tore through armor. The word Zorathi appeared in intercepted signals, perhaps the name they gave themselves, perhaps the sound of death. On the bridge of the Resolute, Marcus watched as holograms displayed the scale of the destruction. One by one, colonies flickered out. Supply routes collapsed. Refugees flooded safer systems. Panic gripped the fleet. Soraka stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as another world burned on the display. "This is no war," she said, her voice low but hard. "This is annihilation. They do not conquer. They consume." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then we fight them," Soraka turned to him sharply. "You saw the feeds. Entire fleets destroyed. My people will not follow weak allies into extinction. Humanity cannot survive this alone. Even we cannot." He met her glare without flinching. "We don't have a choice. If they aren't stopped here, they'll take the galaxy piece by piece. Earth, Korathal Prime, every world in between. Running isn't survival, it's surrender." The crew listened in silence. Some looked afraid, others determined. Marcus could feel the weight pressing down on all of them. This wasn't like the wars they knew. This wasn't about territory or resources. This was survival itself. Messages soon arrived from across the galaxy. Desperate pleas from colonies begging for reinforcements. Broken fleets requesting orders. And worst of all, evidence that the Zorathi didn't just destroy planets. They harvested them. Cities, people, oceans, consumed, transformed into biomass to feed their growing hives. The Korathal warlord demanded answers. He summoned Marcus and Soraka to a war council aboard the great fortress ship Karnak's Wrath. Alien commanders gathered around a vast hollow map, showing swarms of Zorathi advancing like wildfire. "This enemy is beyond you," one Korathal general sneered, glaring at Marcus. "Your species is small, fragile. You cannot even hold your borders. Why should we bleed for you?" Before Marcus could reply, Soraka slammed her fist onto the table, silencing the room. "Because they are not just his enemy," she growled. "I have seen their work. They will come for us too. And when they do, it will not matter how tall you stand or how loud you roar, they will grind us into ash. Better we fight now, while we still have fleets to burn." Marcus backed her with cold precision. He laid out maps, traps, choke points where human cunning could turn even the impossible into a chance. He spoke not as a beggar, but as a strategist who had studied the war to come. For hours, the debate raged. At last, the warlord slammed his axe into the floor. "Enough! Humanity fights with us. If they fall, we fall beside them. Let the galaxy burn with our fury, not with our silence." The alliance was forged anew, not of peace, but of desperation. Back aboard the Resolute, Marcus stood with Soraka in the observation bay, watching stars wheel past. She was quiet, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "You defied me once and lived. Now you defy death itself. Perhaps you are more than a man. Perhaps you are the storm that even the Zorathi cannot break." Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked out at the stars where shadows gathered like a tide. Humanity had survived centuries of war with steel and grit. But this was something different. The storm was coming, and he intended to meet it head-on. The shattered stars were unlike any other system in the galaxy. Long ago, 3 suns had collided, tearing each other apart in a cataclysm that left behind a graveyard of shattered worlds, drifting ember fragments, and a halo of glowing stellar dust. The place was a storm of broken gravity, unpredictable and deadly, but it was also the perfect battleground. If the Zorathi wanted to reach the core colonies, they had to pass through this system. Marcus Vale knew it was their chance to set a trap, to bleed the enemy before they reached safer space. The Korathal called it madness. Marcus called it survival. The Allied fleets arrived in force. Human cruisers and frigates formed agile wolf packs darting between asteroid fields. Korathal dreadnoughts assembled in brutal phalanxes, bristling with rams and plasma cannons. Even civilian ships had been stripped and refitted into makeshift carriers. Every vessel capable of bearing a gun was pressed into service. On the bridge of the Resolute, Marcus stood tall, eyes fixed on the tactical map. Red markers swelled like a flood. The Zorathi swarm. Their ships emerged from slip space in waves, black, writhing masses of biometal, each one alive, each one hungry. Smaller craft clustered around enormous leviathans, and at their heart loomed a flagship so immense it cast shadows across planets. The battle began in silence, broken only by the low hum of engines and the faint thrum of torches burning in the Korathal halls. Then, in one instant, the void exploded. Human frigates struck first, weaving through debris fields, unleashing volleys of missiles that detonated among the alien swarm. Fire blossomed, tearing dozens of smaller Zorathi vessels apart. Before the wreckage even cooled, Korathal dreadnoughts surged forward, their prows blazing with molten energy as they rammed straight into enemy lines, splitting ships open like beasts tearing prey. The Zorathi retaliated with terrifying precision. Their weapons bent reality itself, lances of distorted space that carved through entire formations in single strokes. One human cruiser vanished in a scream of twisted metal, collapsing in on itself like paper crushed by an unseen hand. Marcus barked orders, his voice steady, unflinching. "Pack formation, strike in groups of 5. Draw them into the gravity wells. Use the system against them." The fleet obeyed. Human ingenuity turned the chaos of the battlefield into a weapon. They lured Zorathi craft too close to shattered planetoids, then detonated mines that sent the massive fragments hurtling like slingshot boulders. The aliens were fast but not invincible. Crushed by debris, their hulls split open, spilling black ichor into space. Meanwhile, Soraka led her warriors in boarding actions. Her voice thundered across comms as she hurled herself into the heart of enemy ships, axe blazing, cutting through the nightmare spawn that poured from the walls. For the first time, human soldiers fought beside Korathal berserkers, both sides stunned at how fiercely the other bled. For hours, the battle raged with no sign of ending. Ships burned, planets cracked, and still the Zorathi pressed forward. Marcus's knuckles whitened on the railing as he watched their flagship emerge, a colossus of writhing black, its surface studded with glowing crimson eyes. It was less a ship than a living mountain. When it fired, the stars themselves seemed to die. A single beam ripped through the center of the Allied formation, obliterating half a dozen dreadnoughts in one sweep. Even the Korathal roared in shock. Then disaster struck. Soraka's boarding shuttle, darting between waves of fire, was caught in the shockwave. It spun wildly, flames trailing as it spiraled toward destruction. "Her shuttle's hit!" cried an officer. Marcus didn't hesitate. He ordered the Resolute forward, engines screaming, even as crew shouted warnings. "We'll break! We'll burn! Better broken and burned than cowards!" Marcus roared back. "Take us in!" The Resolute plunged headlong through enemy fire, shields flaring, hull groaning as alien beams ripped past. Fighters swarmed them, battering the ship with fire, but Marcus forced them onward, closer, closer, until they slammed into the swarm surrounding the Zorathi flagship. The bridge shook violently, sparks raining, alarms wailing. Officers struggled to hold their stations. Outside the viewport, Soraka's shuttle tumbled like a wounded bird. At the last instant, grappling beams locked on, hauling it aboard in a storm of debris. The Resolute was crippled, shields failing, but Marcus refused to retreat. He set his gaze on the monstrous flagship ahead, looming like a black hole consuming light. His voice cut through the chaos. "Helm, prepare to ram! We end this now." The crew froze. They all knew what that meant. But not a single man or woman argued. They nodded grimly, steadying themselves as the ship roared toward destiny. As the Resolute tore through the Zorathi swarm, Marcus felt the tide of the war turning. Not because they were winning, they weren't, but because humanity, once again, had chosen defiance. This wasn't just survival. It was a declaration to the galaxy. Mankind would not kneel. The collision course was set. The Resolute screamed as it tore into the Zorathi flagship. The collision ripped through living metal, spilling rivers of black ichor into space. Inside, alarms blared, fires raged, and the ship's spine groaned as bulkheads buckled. Marcus Vale clung to the command rail, blood on his brow, refusing to let go. "Impact successful," croaked an officer, smoke swirling around her station. "We're lodged inside the hull." "Then this is where we finish it," Marcus said, voice like iron. Armored Marines gathered at the airlocks, weapons primed. Beside them, Soraka stood tall, her axe dripping from her last boarding raid, her armor cracked but her spirit blazing. She caught Marcus's gaze, and for the first time, her lips curved in a grin not of mockery, but of savage approval. The airlocks blew open. A storm of shrieks and claws poured in. Zorathi drones, twisted beasts with spines of bone and talons that sparked against steel, surged down the fleshy corridors. The humans unleashed disciplined volleys of gunfire, rifles spitting plasma into the tide. The Korathal warriors charged headlong, roaring like thunder, meeting the swarm with axes and blades. Marcus was in the thick of it, his rifle barking, each burst precise and lethal. When his ammo ran dry, he switched to his sword, carving through creatures that moved like shadows. He fought without hesitation, every strike an act of defiance. Soraka was unstoppable, her axe cleaving through monsters with bone-shattering force. Each swing split creatures apart, spraying black fluid that hissed against her armor. She fought like a goddess of war, unbreakable, indomitable, her roars shaking the corridors. For the first time, Marcus and Soraka moved as one, human precision and barbarian fury locked in perfect rhythm. The deeper they pushed, the more the ship resisted. The walls themselves seemed alive, veins pulsing, membranes sealing corridors. The ground shuddered beneath their boots, and whispers echoed in the dark. This was no mere vessel. It was a hive, and they were inside its beating heart. "Core is ahead!" Marcus shouted over the din. "We cut it out, the swarm falls apart." They reached a vast chamber that glowed like the inside of a dying star. Pulses of energy throbbed from a central mass of black flesh and crystalline growths. A towering being fused into the ship itself. The core mind. Its body rose like a spire, covered in claws, tendrils, and countless glowing eyes that blinked in unison. The sight froze even hardened soldiers. The creature turned its gaze on them, and the air itself trembled. A voice not spoken but poured into their minds, clawed at their sanity. "You are prey. You are dust. You cannot kill the infinite." "Shut up," Marcus growled, and fired straight into its face. The battle was chaos. Drones poured from the walls, protecting their god. The core lashed out with tendrils that smashed soldiers into the ground, crushing armor like paper. The chamber shook with every roar. Marcus was thrown hard against the wall, ribs cracking. His vision swam, blood filling his mouth. But he forced himself to rise. Beside him, Soraka screamed as claws tore across her chest, yet she swung back, her axe cutting clean through a tendril. They refused to fall. Together, they surged forward. Marcus drew its attention with bursts of fire and shouts, while Soraka hacked at its limbs, carving a path toward its heart. Still, the core would not yield. It caught Marcus in a whip-like strike, hurling him across the chamber. His armor cracked, bones snapped. Pain threatened to drown him, but through the haze, he saw it. The core's chest, a pulsing crystalline organ that beat like a heart. The weakness. The target! He staggered upright, ripping a plasma charge from his belt. Soraka was still fighting, still roaring, her axe buried in the core's side. She saw him coming, and for the first time, she did not command or mock. She simply gave him space, holding the beast back with every ounce of her strength. Marcus leapt, climbing the writhing limbs, each movement tearing his body apart. The core screeched, its mind clawing into his skull, but he forced himself higher. With his last strength, he slammed the charge into the crystalline chest. "For Earth!" he roared, and drove his blade into the detonator. The explosion was like a second sun igniting. The core shrieked, its body splitting in a storm of fire and black rain. Drones collapsed, twitching, their lifeblood draining into the floor. The entire ship shuddered, its walls unraveling, its systems dying. Marcus was thrown clear, landing in the wreckage, barely clinging to life. Soraka limped toward him, bleeding but unbowed. She dropped to her knees beside him, her massive hands trembling as she touched his broken form. "You mad, fearless fool," she whispered, her voice raw. "You bled for me, for them, for all." The chamber burned around them, but neither moved. The core was dead. The impossible had been done. The war was not over. But in that moment, humanity had struck the first true blow against the Zorathi, and Marcus Vale had proven to Soraka and to the galaxy that mankind was far more than prey. The Zorathi flagship was dying. Its spine cracked open, venting fire and black mist into space. Across the void, human ships, battered and burning, pulled back, watching the impossible unfold. For the first time in living memory, the swarm had lost a god. Inside the wreck, Marcus Vale lay broken on the deck. Smoke drifted past, sparks showered from torn cables. His chest rose shallowly, ribs grinding with each breath. He had no strength left. The fight had consumed him. Yet someone moved through the flames. Soraka, scarred and bleeding, dragged herself across the ruined chamber. Her armor hung in pieces, her axe chipped and blackened, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. She dropped beside Marcus, pressing a hand to his chest, feeling the faint rhythm of life still clinging on. "Stubborn human," she muttered, voice hoarse. "Even gods could not make you kneel." He tried to laugh, but blood bubbled from his lips instead. "Did we win?" She glanced at the collapsing chamber. The core was ash. The drones lay scattered and lifeless. The hive ship was breaking apart around them. "Yes," she said with a fierceness that was almost pride. "You struck down the heart of the swarm." A violent tremor split the floor beneath them. The ship was tearing itself to pieces. They had minutes at best. "Your people wait outside," Soraka said. We must go. Marcus shook his head weakly. I can't walk. The barbarian stared at him. In her culture, warriors too broken to move were left behind to meet their fate with pride. To carry them was shame. But Soraka did not hesitate. She hauled him onto her shoulders, ignoring his groans of pain. Then you will not walk, she said. You will ride the strength of Soraka. Through collapsing corridors, she carried him, leaping over cracks, smashing through bone-like barriers, cutting down the last twitching drones with one arm while holding Marcus with the other. The ship crumbled around them, but she did not falter. Finally, light burst ahead, the docking bay where human marines still fought to hold ground. They saw her emerge from the storm of fire, Marcus clinging to her back, and a cheer rose despite the carnage. "Get him to the shuttle," she roared, shoving Marcus into waiting hands. The medics rushed forward, dragging him inside. He fought to keep his eyes open, to hold on to the sight of her silhouette framed against the burning hive. "Soraka," he rasped. "You stayed." Her gaze locked on his, fierce and unyielding. "You earned me," she said simply. The shuttle tore free just as the flagship imploded, collapsing into a storm of molten shards. Outside, the human fleet scattered, engines flaring as the shockwave hurled wreckage across space. When the firestorm cleared, silence fell. The Zorathi swarm ships, once coordinated, drifted aimlessly. Without the core, they were fractured, blind. Humanity had bought itself time, perhaps even hope. Marcus awoke days later in the infirmary of the Resolute's sister ship. His body was wrapped in healing mesh, bones pinned by regrowth tech. Every breath hurt, but he was alive, and sitting beside him was Soraka. Not armored, not wielding her axe, but watching with a strange stillness. "You woke," she said. He smiled faintly. "Disappointed?" Her lips twitched. "Relieved. And angry. You made me care for you, human." "That is unforgivable," he chuckled, then winced at the pain. "You said once, you'd never be my wife unless I defeated you. Did this count?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she leaned forward, her forehead pressing gently to his. A gesture of her people, older than war, older than conquest. "You did not defeat me," she whispered. "You fought beside me. You bled as I bled. You shattered a god where my people had only fallen. No warrior of Korathal could ask for more." Her hand, scarred and calloused, closed around his. "So yes, Marcus Vale, you are worthy." When he was strong enough to walk again, the human fleet gathered to honor the fallen. Hundreds of names were spoken, their voices echoing through the void. Humanity had paid dearly, but their enemies now knew something new. Humans were not prey. They were hunters who could strike at the heart of nightmares. At the ceremony, Soraka stood beside Marcus, not as a captive, not as a reluctant bride, but as his equal. When the admirals questioned her future, she answered with steel in her voice. "I go where he goes. I fight where he fights. Humanity is my clan now." The galaxy took notice. Stories spread of the human captain and the barbarian warlord who together slew a god of the swarm. Worlds that had once dismissed Earth began to whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, mankind could be the spark to turn the tide. And when Marcus looked at Soraka, standing proud beside him, he knew this was only the beginning. Part 6 ends not with peace, but with a promise. Humanity had survived the impossible, and in their survival, they had gained an ally fierce enough to shake empires. The war was far from over, but now, together, they would write a legend the galaxy could never forget.